On the eastern edge of a decaying city, in a rust-stained tenement barely held together by time and memory, lived a young man named Elias. His life was a tapestry woven with threadbare clothes, second-hand books, and dreams too heavy for the shoulders that carried them. Elias had no memory of his parents. All he had were fading photographs. His mother with warm eyes and a strong jaw. His father standing tall in a military uniform. They died in a car accident when he was 5, or so he was told. The rest of his childhood was spent in the custody of a rotating cast of relatives who made it clear he was not truly one of them. He'd been a stray seed, tossed from one unwilling garden to the next. But the blood that ran in Elias's veins was not without power. He was born into the Calderon family, an old dynasty of wealth, influence, and reputation. Mansions, oil empires, and private jets bore their name. But Elias had been swiftly cut off after his parents' death. Why? He never understood. Rumors whispered that a clause in his father's will had been buried, rewritten, ignored. He was 10 when his last guardian, a bitter uncle who ran a scrapyard, sent him packing with nothing but a backpack and the words, "You've got Calderon blood but not Calderon worth." He never looked back. Elias survived, but he never really lived. He worked odd jobs. Dishwashing in a greasy diner, sweeping floors at a mechanic's shop, tutoring kids in math even when he could barely afford a textbook himself. He read voraciously in the library, soaking in economics, law, and business like a sponge. Though the name Calderon had cursed him, he studied their rise to power obsessively. He read about the shipping empire started by his great-grandfather, the legal battles, the investments, the charities masking corruption. Somewhere beneath the corporate lies he knew was the truth. His parents had been too noble or too honest, and it cost them their place in the empire. Still Elias said nothing. He sought no revenge. He filed no lawsuits. He made no noise. But he remembered everything. When Elias was 27, an old man named Howard Trask approached him outside the campus library where he worked as a janitor. Trask was wiry and sharp-eyed, a retired lawyer who once served as a junior associate for Calderon Enterprises. "I knew your father," he said simply. Elias looked up from the garbage bin, skeptical. "I read his will," Trask continued. "There was a trust, large one, meant for you. But someone buried it." Elias felt the air shift. Trask handed him a business card and said, "If you ever want to dig it up, call me." Weeks passed before Elias finally did. What followed was a quiet storm. Trask worked discreetly, pulling files, records, and testimonies long buried in vaults and legal closets. It became clear. After Elias's parents died, the Calderon board, headed by his ruthless grandfather Edgar, hid Elias's trust and declared him an unfit heir due to instability. They'd forged psychiatric evaluations, used Elias's childhood trauma as proof of incompetence, and quietly redistributed his inheritance among the other heirs. It was embezzlement cloaked in legalism. Trask asked him, "Do you want to go public? File suit? Or settle quietly?" Elias didn't answer. Not yet. A year later, Elias arrived at the Calderon estate in a rented suit and shoes with thin soles. He was invited, begrudgingly, after months of quiet legal maneuvering and threats from Trask. He sat at the dinner table with uncles, cousins, and his aging grandfather. "You should have stayed lost," said one cousin, swirling wine. "You've always been a Calderon," said his grandfather, with syrup in his voice and poison in his eyes. Elias smiled coldly. "You're not wrong. I am a Calderon. And Calderons don't forget debts." That night, he handed Trask the signed papers. He wouldn't settle. He would go to court. The lawsuit was public, brutal, and dragged the family through every scandal they had hoped to keep buried. Old reporters reappeared. Secret ledgers came to light. Other silenced voices found courage in Elias's stand. The case took 2 years, but Elias won. He reclaimed the trust plus damages. More importantly, he tarnished the Calderon name in every financial and philanthropic circle that once worshipped them. His grandfather died the following winter. No one mourned. Elias used the money to create something that had never existed in the Calderon legacy: a scholarship for abandoned youth. He built libraries and community centers in neighborhoods like the one he had grown up in. But he kept his last name. Let the world remember. Not all Calderons were the same. Years later, when Elias was asked in an interview why he didn't change his name, he paused before answering. Because I want the world to know that even in families built on greed and cruelty, someone can rise without becoming like them. Then he added, and because gold may be heavy, but it's not impossible to carry if you walk in your own direction. Elias stood in his penthouse in the heart of the city, a far cry from the moldy tenement he once called home. The walls were glass, the floors polished oak, and the silence so complete it pressed on him like a weight. On his desk sat two objects: a black and white photo of his parents, and a court document declaring him the legal heir of the Calderon estate. He had won, and yet he felt hollow. In the mirror, he saw not a victor, but a man forged in spite. His victories were lined with loss. The betrayal of family. The years wasted in the shadows. The innocence burned away. So he began asking himself the question no one dared ask the rich. Now that I have everything, who am I without the war? Despite his efforts to distance himself, Calderon blood kept knocking. One morning, a call came from Dorian Calderon, his estranged cousin and former heir apparent. I want to meet, Dorian said. No threats, no lawyers, just two Calderons. Elias agreed. They met at a rooftop bar overlooking the bay, a place where their grandfather once brokered deals in whispers. Dorian was aged beyond his years. Alcohol, lawsuits, and exile had stolen the shine from his once perfect smile. You killed the Calderon name, Dorian said. And now you think you're its savior. Elias leaned back unfazed. I didn't kill it. I buried what was already rotting. Dorian chuckled darkly. You think your charities matter. That giving away crumbs redeems the blood you carry. He stood to leave, but before walking away he added, the Calderons have enemies. Old ones. You've just inherited them. Started with a break-in. Elias returned home to find his safe cracked open, but nothing stolen. Instead, something had been left behind. An old leather ledger, bound in red thread, filled with names, offshore accounts, and transactions going back 50 years. The Calderons had not only built their empire on oil, but on war profiteering, arms trafficking, and laundering money for regimes now lost to history. This was the dark heart of the Calderon legacy, one Elias had never known. He confronted Trask. Why didn't you tell me? Trask, now frail and coughing blood into a napkin, looked him dead in the eye. Because your father knew. And he was killed for trying to expose it. Elias realized he was no longer fighting a family. He was in the crosshairs of something deeper, a hidden syndicate that the Calderons once fed and served. His lawsuit had disrupted old power structures. Now those shadows wanted to know, was Elias a threat or an asset? Anonymous threats began. His phone was tapped. A man posing as a reporter was caught outside his foundation offices with a loaded pistol. Rather than retreat, Elias did what no Calderon had done before. He called a press conference. I inherited a fortune built on blood and silence. I will not pass that legacy forward. I have opened every ledger. I have reported everything to the international authorities. If anything happens to me, hundreds of documents will be released worldwide. He became a global story overnight. And a marked man. With his money, Elias created a firewall. Journalists, whistleblower platforms, human rights groups. He paid for protection not for himself, but for the truth. He dismantled parts of the Calderon empire piece by piece, selling off their holdings, redirecting profits, publicly naming complicit board members and donors. The enemies came in waves. Some sued. Some threatened. One tried to bribe him with a seat at the world's hidden table. I don't want your table, Elias said. I want to burn it. But the closer he got to the core, the clearer it became. If he kept going, he might not survive. Elias disappeared for several weeks. Rumors swirled. Assassination. Escape. A deal made in secret. But then, on the anniversary of his father's death, he reappeared. This time not as a Calderon, but simply as Elias.